History of First Lutheran Church, Washburn, North Dakota. 125 years ago, First Lutheran Church had its beginning, shortly after a colony of pioneers journeyed to the Washburn area from Hudson, Wisconsin. On September 13, 1883, a worship service was conducted by the visiting Reverend I.O. Shea of Hudson. This first service was held in the home of Ole Hammer, and the group decided to be called Den Norska Evangeliska Menighed, a town of Sverdrup, McLean County, Dakota Territory. The Constitution was adopted December 14, 1883, which was in effect until 1905, when a new one was drafted, patterned on one recommended by the United Church, one of the branches of Norwegian Lutherans in America. Unofficially, the church's name was shortened to the Sverdrup Lutheran Church. The congregation was served by various visiting clergymen. One of them, Reverend J.M.O. Ness of Purley, Minnesota, helped the congregation establish the first Sunday school, which was organized July 27, 1884. Also on that date, the congregation came into possession of its first real property, when Jens Olson and J.P. Peterson each gave 1.5 acres of adjoining land. This 3-acre plot became the site for the first church and cemetery. In 1886, a call was issued to a theological student, C.O. Abel, who accepted the call and served for 3 years as the congregation's first full-time pastor. Like many of the pioneer pastors, he was a versatile man, working a homestead, as well as serving as the superintendent of schools for McLean County to supplement his meager income. Pastor Abel conducted the first confirmation service, in which 7 youths were confirmed on September 11, 1887. Again, in 1889, ministerial services were dependent upon visiting pastors, including R.A. Lavick, Red Lake Falls, Minnesota, O.H. Norby, Sims, North Dakota, and his assistant, J.A. Deason. In 1892, Pastor Deason accepted a call to serve the congregation, as well as several others, in a wide area on both sides of the Missouri River. He made his rounds traveling by horse and buggy, on foot, on skis, any way necessary to minister to his congregations. He continued to serve until 1900.
My name is Terry Peterson, and I'd like to talk a little bit about the early beginnings of our congregation. The church began with the group of homesteaders from Hudson, Wisconsin. They were called the Hudson Colony, and they came to McLean County to homestead, and they ended up in Township 14581, which they later named to Sverdrup Township. They were a group of Norwegians, Swedes, and Danes. Came in 1883, and in that same fall they organized the church.
In 1893, the first Ladies' Aid organization for the church was formed, known today as Women of the Evangelical Lutheran Church. The women's group has always been the bedrock of congregational support at First Lutheran.
The Ladies' Aid back then was a large organization. In fact, very large. My mother and Mrs. Hartman were very best of friends, but I never heard either one call the other one by their first name. It was always Mrs. Wicklander and Mrs. Hartman. And I think back in those days, I was trying to think of Mrs. Hans Fisher's first name, and for the life of me, I can't think of it because we called everybody by their married names. It was just more formal than it is nowadays.
Pastor Deason was followed by the Reverend Olaf Mathiasen, during whose pastorate the first parsonage was built. Prior to that time, the pastors had lived on their own homesteads or in rented housing in Washburn. The parsonage was built in 1902 on lots in Washburn donated by the Townsite Company. The property was located on 6th Avenue across from the elementary school. It also included a barn for the pastor's horse and buggy. The Reverend L.A. Breen came to Washburn in 1903 and served for 9 years. After 21 years, Sverdrup Church was able to build its first sanctuary in 1905 on the land that had been given to them earlier. The site was located in open country, 6 miles northeast of Washburn. The church building was formally dedicated September 2nd, 1906. Pastor Breen resigned in 1912, and in the interim of 1912 to 1914, Pastor J.A. Deason served as acting pastor. Reverend A.M. Turmo served as pastor in 1915, followed by Reverend N.H. Holm from 1916 to 1918. It was at this time that the union of three synods took place. Originally called the Norwegian Lutheran Church, the name was later changed to Evangelical Lutheran Church. Sverdrup Lutheran Church of Washburn belonged to this fellowship. This was also a time of reorganization for the congregation. The Washburn parish consisted of three congregations: South St. Olaf, Sverdrup, and Painted Woods. The Reverend Alfred Breivik answered the call for a pastor, serving the congregation from May 1919 to August 1921. During this time, services for Washburn were held both in the country church and in town, either at the county courthouse or in the schoolhouse. On April 9, 1921, it was voted to purchase lots in town from Joseph Mann. A basement was finished, and the cornerstone was laid September 18, 1921. Following Pastor Breivik's resignation, Reverend Harold Hansen of Mercer served as a temporary pastor. The following spring, he resigned his Mercer parish in order to fully serve in Washburn. With the completion of the basement church, all of the services were held there. The original church building, which had served as the congregation's house of worship for 16 years, was sold to St. Paul's Lutheran Church in Turtle Lake in 1925 for $750. Plus $75 for the altar and painting. During Pastor Hansen's tenure, the minutes were first recorded in English beginning in 1921. English pastoral records followed in 1926. The envelope system for the gathering of offerings was first introduced in 1924. In 1927, the congregation became entirely self-supporting. Prior to that time, it had received a subsidy from the Home Mission Board of the Norwegian Lutheran Church. The Reverend C.A. Carlson became the pastor in 1928. In September of that year, it was decided to erect a church on the existing basement, and the work started in January of 1929. While the new church was being constructed, the congregation also decided to select a new name. Amending the Constitution, the name was changed to Washburn Lutheran Congregation. Pastor Carlson resigned in 1934 and was followed by Reverend Louis Hagen of Hazen on an interim basis. Reverend C.E.L. Lucky became pastor in 1935.
I'm Hurley Holton, and I was born and raised here. I was born in 1921. We were confirmed the 21st of March, 1937. We've had different pastors during the years. You know, I remember the older ones easier than the newer ones.
We are the oldest living members of First Lutheran Church. Well, I've always been very grateful to the people that had the vision to build First Lutheran, because that was in the days when Washburn was small and there weren't the people that came with the influx of coal mining and power plants and things like that. And there are some families that the Sheldons and the Tweetons and Russell Peterson, and Art Grothy was very influential in working with the church. And there are still grandchildren and children of those people who go to First Lutheran.
I'm Richard Tweeton from Washburn, North Dakota. I was born and raised here in the Washburn community, born 1945. My family has been here for many, many years. My grandfather, John Tweeton, came to this area in 1906. The Tweeton family has been involved very much in the Lutheran Church ever since those days. It's getting to the point our resources of people, what we call the older generation, are getting fewer and fewer all the time. You know, my next door neighbor, Russell Peterson, you know, he died here recently, and he was a very good source of information for this church, but he's gone. My dad's gone. My grandfather's gone. You know, we keep losing our sources, and So history is a very important part of us, and as we get older, we think more of our roots. We think more of our heritage.
On September 13th, 1936, a festival service commemorating the 53 years of life of the congregation was held. Somehow, the 50th anniversary had slipped by without notice. In 1938, the Constitution was amended again to rename the congregation First Lutheran Church of Washburn. The parish was served from 1937 to 1940 by Reverend M.G. Berg, and then by Reverend Carl G. Nelson from 1940 to 49. In May of 1945, the Zion Lutheran Church in Washburn dissolved its congregation and joined First Lutheran. This brought people together of German background along with those of Scandinavian descent, an event that was to occur on a national scale 15 years later with the merger of 3 Lutheran groups in 1960 to form the American Lutheran Church. It was during the tenure of Pastor Nelson that the second parsonage was purchased. Reverend M.J. Sheldall served as pastor of the congregation from 1949 until 1954. He was followed by Reverend I.P. Paulson, who with his family was the first to live in the congregation's third parsonage located at 516 Main Avenue.
Well, our name is Jim and Vi Vrana. We came to Washburn in the fall of 1958 and moved into the house right next to the Lutheran parsonage. So we soon got acquainted with Pastor Paulson. He was very artistic, and he drew likenesses of certain people in Washburn here, mostly the older people. And they're very good likenesses, and it's just a pencil type of drawing, but he had the sparkle in their eyes and got it really just right. He was very good at that.
They were good neighbors and good pastor and family. We enjoyed living next to them. We ate many meals together, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
Up until this time, Painted Woods Lutheran Church was a part of the parish, but because of declining membership, that congregation was dissolved in 1957, and First Lutheran Church became a single unit.
Back then, the church always had church picnics in the summertime. And in the early 50s, say 52 or 3 in that area, they went out to Harry Kesselring's pasture. And of course, there was lots of food, and there was always a softball game going on all afternoon. And then in 1954 through 1957, the church picnics were held out to our farm. And it was in 57 when my father, Harold Sauer, passed away. And after that, I guess I really don't remember where they went, but they discontinued having them in our place.
It was during Pastor Paulson's years of service that the congregation recognized a growing need to expand, especially in the educational phase of its ministry. And the decision was made to build a new church.
The fundraising for this building began in 1955 when they thought they needed to build a new building. In 1957, they organized a building committee, and my father, Russell Peterson, was on that committee. They chose Al Shanerock and son for architect and constructing the church. There was a lot of volunteer help. In that time, they didn't have ready-mix trucks. They mixed concrete on site, so they needed sand and aggregate hauled from Hensler. And it was in the days before the bridge was built. And I recall that Ernest Sauer, who was a widow at that time, had a fairly new truck, and she donated the use of that truck along with other farmers, and I drove the truck, and we took the trucks on the ferry, Oscar Anderson's ferry, across the river, and we got our load of sand or aggregate over at Hensler, and then we drove up to Pick City and came across the dam because the ferry couldn't handle a loaded truck. And that was quite an adventure for a young guy to do.
every Sunday when we came to church, either before or after the service, we always had to come over. And of course, Dad was always, curious, like many of the men were, and see how the progress was coming along. Many members of the church, helped in whatever way they could, to defray the expenses. Dad and a lot of other men took their trucks and drove out to Hebron and hauled all the brick back.
The cornerstone for the new church was laid in 1959, and the structure was completed in 1960. And again, there was a September dedication, September 18th, 1960. The bell from the previous church was put into place in the tower, and the Good Shepherd stained glass window was also transferred to the new church and installed in the west wall of the Sunday school wing. The baptismal font was placed in the chancel. Thus, there was a link from the past to the present. Pastor Paulson was succeeded by Reverend Ray Vinsky, who served from 1965 to 1968 when he resigned to further his education. Reverend Elmer S. Odland was called, and in April of 1968 began his ministry in Washburn. In December of 1973, Reverend Odland and his family moved into a newly built parsonage located a block east of the church, and the former parsonage was sold. A highlight in the life of the congregation came in November of 1972, when Dr. Kelvin Jack Eichhorst was ordained into the ministry of the American Lutheran Church. He was the first son of the congregation to do so.
I'm Jack Eichhorst. Actually, I always like to say I'm from Falkirk, North Dakota. But I was baptized in this church, in the old church, in September of 1934. I was confirmed in the spring of 1948 under the Reverend Carl G. Nelson. But it was after high school that I sensed a very strong call that I had to go to the ministry. I wanted to be a lawyer. I had an appointment with the Naval Academy, but God grabbed me by the back of the neck and away I went. I was privileged to be ordained here on November 19th of 1972. That was just a wonderful day. First Lutheran did it up in great style. And I have never forgotten how Oliver Borlaug did such a great issue in the Washburn Leader. It was a wonderful experience.
The 1970s and early 1980s saw a large number of families moving into the Washburn area because of the booming energy industry. First Lutheran benefited from the impact, with many families joining the congregation.
I'm Melanie Beckman, and I was Melanie Andrew when I came to Washburn back in June of 1977. And we joined the church here at Washburn at that time. Some memories of our first years here at First Lutheran, sitting in church and getting the look from Dad when we misbehaved. Yes, I did come to church here then. I raised my 3 daughters at this church. They all were baptized and confirmed here at First Lutheran. And I basically, when my children were younger, especially my oldest, I would come and sit with Mom and Dad in the pew and continue to get the look from Dad if my daughter was crying and whatnot and needed to walk out of the church.
I joined this church in about the year 2001. A friend asked me to come here a few times, and after coming here a few times, I realized how much I liked it. I actually loved it, so I joined. My husband's a Lutheran, so that also was part of it. I love Sunday mornings. I love getting up and coming to church. I love the Advent part. I love the Lenten services. The people are very warm and friendly.
We have moved into the community about 2 years ago and came to First Lutheran Church as new members, and they've just been so welcoming and just a really good group of people, and we've just felt very comfortable there since the very first day, and we've really enjoyed it. And we got Tolia here baptized a year ago, And the ladies of the church made him this quilt, and he really liked that and still does, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything you'd like to say about the quilt?
It's very soft, and it has these soft thingies, and I slept on that one night.
In 1975, the church mortgage was burned, and Pastor Odland resigned in 1980 after 12 years of service to the church. Reverend Sammy Ishmer of Bismarck served as interim pastor of the congregation until a permanent replacement was called. The congregation voted to sponsor a Laotian family, and on an extremely cold day in January 1980, the Pomachan family arrived and were aided by First Lutheran members in their adjustment to life in the United States. The family moved to Bismarck in 1982 and later relocated to the warmer climate of Florida. Pastor Owen Gossadalan answered the call to serve First Lutheran in 1980, arriving with his family from Rushford, Minnesota. Because of the number of new families joining the church, the educational facilities became crowded. In 1981, the congregation purchased the Sigurd Carlson property east of the church and converted the home into Sunday school classrooms. Later, in 1983, the 100th anniversary of First Lutheran's congregation was celebrated. A highlight of the January 1984 annual meeting was the burning of the parsonage mortgage. First Lutheran Church started what was to become a yearly tradition by serving its first lutefisk and meatball dinner in October of 1984. Over the years, this event proved to be very popular, attracting nearly 1,000 lutefisk lovers every fall from over a large area.
I'm Brad Sheldon. I've been a member of First Lutheran all my life, and I've been involved with the lutefisk supper this is our 24th year. And I'm kind of one that helps seat everybody and kind of a host, so to speak. It's not about money for a fundraiser or anything. It's to bring everyone together, to work together on a Sunday afternoon and be in our Lord's house and enjoy each other. And that's what's made our lutefisk supper very successful. We have sign-up sheets that start in late September for looking for volunteer help, people to serve the tables and people to cook the meatballs and the lefse. The women of our church have probably been the backbone to this supper. Without them, we wouldn't have been able to do what we're doing. There's a lot of work that takes place in preparation, but mostly it's volunteer help and volunteer food that comes, and people have fitted into their jobs over the years, and they just kind of keep doing the same thing year after year. And for myself, who kind of helps organize it, it really makes my job easy. And so it's just been a great pleasure to work with the members of our church.
Members of the church since the fall of 1972. And I've been, I guess, more on the cleaning and keeping up side of it with helping with the Luthefisk dinner. For many years, we were called the Holy Rollers because we were rolling the lefse, but I've graduated to meatballs now.
James Borlaug became the second son of the congregation to be ordained into ministry in the American Lutheran Church in 1986.
I'm Judy Borlaug, and my husband Oliver and I moved to Washburn in 1953. We had 3 little boys from 6, 4, and 5 months. And of course, the first Sunday we were here, we found First Lutheran Church, and we attended regularly every Sunday. And it's like a second home to us. The highlight of the church for me too also is the fact that 4 of my 5 children were married in this church, and our 3rd son was ordained as a pastor in this church. So we have many good memories of First Lutheran Church.
During the decade of the 1980s, the large project of replacing the windows in the sanctuary with stained glass was started and completed. Each window symbolically captured the essence of the story of salvation as found in the Bible and in church teachings. (1988) saw the birth of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. First Lutheran became a part of this new, larger Lutheran Church with the merger of the American Lutheran Church, the Lutheran Church in America, and the Association of Evangelical Lutheran Churches. Following Pastor Gossadalen's resignation in February 1993, retired pastor Magnus Lutness of Bismarck served as interim pastor for the congregation. The Reverend Bradley Brower answered the call to serve First Lutheran, and he and his family moved to Washburn in the fall of 1993. The decade of the 90s saw several changes in the church building and worship service. A new sound system was installed in 1994, made possible by many memorials. In 1995, an extensive kitchen remodeling project was completed. The Lutheran Book of Worship was supplemented by the With One Voice hymnal in 1997, and then also by the Worship and Praise songbook, both of which were used extensively during contemporary worship during the 2-year period when the church had a second service. In support of plans by Camp of the Cross near Garrison to remodel and update the camp, First Lutheran members responded in a big way in 1998 and donated funds to build one of the cabins. It is a wonderful facility, providing yearly camping and retreats for youth and adults alike.
I'm Peggy Moran, and I've been involved with First Lutheran Church since we moved here in about 2001. A couple years into it, I got involved in representing Camp of the Cross for our church. In 2003, the women of the church, the Welka group, began subsidizing the kids' fees for their camping weeks up there. And then in 2004, the church council also joined in on that, and we've had anywhere from 5 to 20 students go up there for camp sessions during the summertime.
First Lutheran's mission statement was updated in 2000 to read, "Our mission, working hand in hand to know Christ and make Christ known through worship, Christian education, caring ministries, and service." Because of declining Sunday school numbers, the parish house was no longer needed as classroom space. It was sold in 2001 and moved from its location. The vacated lot was landscaped and made into a parking lot for the church. Pastor Brower resigned in 2003, and the Reverend Dr. C. Jack Eichhorst of rural Washburn served as interim pastor. Pastor Eric Johnson accepted the call to serve First Lutheran and began his ministry in September of 2004. With the assistance of his wife Catherine, a contemporary worship service was again revived, periodically using the talents of both adults and youth in leading the service.
What What struck us as we first came is the remarkable number of people who had so many different gifts in the congregation. Catherine and I have really enjoyed our time here at First Lutheran Church. It's been a great place for us to be right now.
The women have been very faithful in various church activities throughout the years. Some of the ladies' many areas of interest include the annual Craft and Food Bazaar in the 1980s and 90s, which eventually became a quilt, Kuchen, Lefse card sale. Cooperating with other local churches in organizing the annual World Day of Prayer. And for several years, the Progressive Church Suppers, the Meals on Wheels program, and attending to the schedule for local recipients, the annual Thank Offering service in November, and the Advent Breakfast in December. Both are wonderful seasonal events. Delivering of goodies from the heart to area residents. The celebration teas each spring for the confirmands and high school graduates. Presenting Bibles to the third grade Sunday school children every year. The updating and maintenance of the church library. The serving of wedding and anniversary receptions and funeral lunches, as well as other social functions. Supervising the construction of hundreds of quilts. And assembling the Lutheran World Relief projects. It is indeed quite a list.
I'm Gail Johnson.
And I'm Brenda Inkenbauer.
And we were involved with the Church Bazaar in 1990. I think we had the bazaar for 20 plus years.
Yep. We had a lot of stuff going on for the bazaar. We had each circle involved in it at that time. And what they did is took a holiday like Christmas, Easter, whatever, and decided as a circle to make crafts for that holiday. And so we had the whole basement was full of different booths, and we served soup and sandwiches, and remember all the people at the back door waiting to get in. It was quite the big production to put on, and it was fun.
I'm Sandy Wagner, and I am one of the coordinators for our Partners in Prayer, our prayer chain for our church. It got started March 9th of 2003. After a bunch of us women got together and were talking about a prayer chain, and we thought there was very much of a need for this. And the prayer chain is also for the community, not just First Lutheran Church. We have had people call from other churches and say, would you please start a prayer for someone that they know also.
Education for the youth has been a priority throughout the church's history, from 3-year-olds through confirmation, and also high school age. The Sunday school children look forward each year to presenting their Christmas program to the congregation. Vacation Bible School is held each summer.
Very important to be involved with the kids in Sunday school, both at the church and at home. You know, it's something that needs to be brought into the home as well as at church. And yes, both Brett and I did teach Sunday school. Again, Brett actually taught a lot more than I did. I pretty much taught just a little bit when the kids were real young. And I did help with Bible school and stuff too, which I also think is very important. Jeffrey, my youngest, went on the mission trip to Mexico when the group went down there, and that was an amazing experience for him. He really enjoyed it, he learned from it, he grew in his faith from it. It was an amazing experience that group had.
We've got such awesome kids in our church. And I guess I cannot stress enough, I think, how important it is for the kids to feel like they really belong to the church and have their special place in the church. Because we've got, like I said, phenomenal kids that are very spirit-filled, and us as adults, we need to share that.
I've been teaching Sunday school now for, I believe it's approximately 3 years. I do the preschool and the kindergarten ages, and I think it's important to bring a godly life, I guess, so to speak, and that information to children as early as you can, because the younger they are, the more trusting they are, the more willing they are to hear these things. I mean, Jesus said, "Bring your little children to me," and I guess I want them to be there as soon as possible, because little kids are like a sponge. They'll soak up whatever you give to them, and if they're hearing violence and anger, they're going to pick up that faster than anything else. But I think it's important to bring Word of God, Word of Jesus, and say salvation and the gospel to them as early as possible.
It's harder nowadays than it was when we were growing up. The kids have so much more pressure on them, whether peer pressure with the drugs, alcohol, and I think that it is important. You know, a lot of the times I don't get a lot of things out of church. Especially with my 1-year-old and 4-year-old now, and it's not easy. It's not easy to get here, but these kids, they need those morals because of all the problems that they had to deal with now, and it gives them more, I think, of a backbone. And they've met the people here that gives them a backbone to fall on. If they can't come to me, they can come to somebody, here hopefully in the church.
Support for global missions has been a ministry of First Lutheran. Currently, the church contributes to the mission work of Annie and Willie Langji in Senegal and Katie Naram Miyamoto in Japan.
I do remember so very, very much the fact that in the earlier times when my mother and father were a part of the congregation, there was a stronger emphasis in the church on world missions.
I think I was the last person in town to make homemade soap using fats and lye, but that was a big thing in the early days. Our Women's Missionary Society would make soap for Lutheran World Relief, and they would tear up old sheets and make bandages and send them to the hospitals in Africa or Madagascar or wherever.
I remember that these women, they had a strange, they were farm women. They weren't well educated. A lot of them, my mom, 8th grade education, there were quite a few of them. But they had big hearts. And they caught a vision for things going on in the world. And it used to be a regular feature that missionaries would come through and give us a picture. I can still sing the chorus for Jesus Loves Me in Chinese, because out at the country school I was taught by missionaries to China. And there was an awareness of this, and it was a personalized awareness. They didn't just give to budgets. They gave because they actually thought this gospel ought to be preached around the world. They may have been naive, not known much about that world, but they knew that this was something to be shared.
Missions has changed a lot since those days. We still do have missionaries who are doctors and nurses and teachers, but they seem to be more in a supportive position now after the indigenous people have been able to train their own pastors and doctors and nurses. Our people more or less are in helping positions, and there's so many different fields, social work now, and so many different concerns that is included in missions, and I'm talking global missions, foreign missions. By the way, we do have a global missions book, annual, comes out, and right in the center have to read it every once in a while to remind myself, but we have projects in 70 different countries around the world, including Russia, and they're just all over.
Over the years, the congregation has been given the opportunity to participate in Bible studies. Along with many individual sessions, Bethel Bible was offered in the 1970s. A 10-year program, Search Bible, took place in the 1980s and 1990s, with Divine Drama Bible also offered in the 90s. Throughout the years, when the women of the church have held their monthly meetings, Bible studies have been included. And in 2002, the men also got into the act and started a weekly Tuesday morning before work session. Music has always been an important part of the ministry of First Lutheran, and the church has been blessed with wonderful adult and youth choirs and highly talented individuals to lead them.
Our organists here are awesome. We have lots and lots of good, talented people. Leanne Richard, Teresa Peterson, and Catherine Johnson are all our current organists, and also Tim Shenfish plays organ for the church now and then.
I'm Marlene Slag, and I was organist at First Lutheran for 22 years, starting in about 1957 in the old church, and I followed Marjorie Mann. And I'm not sure how long she had been organist, but I'm sure it was a considerable length of time.
We also have lots of music involved with the younger kids in Sunday school, and I do the younger kids, and Brent Peterson does the kids 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, and we also have the youth bell choir, which is 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. We just try to reach out to the community and to the church community to make our services special and to give our gifts back.
A 3-octave set of handbells was purchased with memorials and gifts in 2000. And with adults and youth together learning this musical art, much has been added to the worship service. The men's music ministry was formed in 2004 and supplements the weekly worship service from time to time.
Glory to his name. There to my heart was the blood applied. Glory to his name.
A ladies' group, Joyful Noise, originated in 2006 and adds their voices also in worship and praise.
The theme of our anniversary this year is lifting high the cross for 125 years. There's a song, the chorus goes, lift high the cross, the love of Christ proclaim, till all the world adore his holy name. And that's what's been done in this church throughout those 125 years, and we hope to continue to do that for a long time to come.
These historical events and highlights reveal that First Lutheran in Washburn is not simply a church building. It is people. People working hand in hand to know Christ and make Christ known. Lifting high the cross for 125 years.